There's something I've been learning the hard way, and I want to tell you about it because I think you'll recognize pieces of yourself in it. For a long time, I thought being strong meant pretending not to care, or at least convincing everyone else that I didn't. I wore this mask of calmness like nothing could touch me, but underneath my heart raced at the smallest provocation. My stomach tied itself in knots, and I lived with a constant sense that I had to hold it all together or I'd shatter. The mask fooled people, but it never fooled me. And eventually, I realized that strength wasn't about how well I could fake indifference. It was about whether I could remain rooted when life shook me. I started to notice how automatic my reactions were. Someone's harsh word, a disapproving look, a sudden disappointment, it all set me off inside before I even had the chance to decide how I wanted to respond. It was like my whole nervous system was wired to treat life as a threat. And in those moments, the mask would slip. I'd snap back or retreat or drown in self-doubt. Then afterward, I'd blame myself, telling myself I should have been stronger. It was exhausting living in this loop where I didn't feel in control of myself. But one day I thought, what if control doesn't mean tightening the grip? What if it means loosening it? I remember sitting alone one evening after a particularly hard day, and instead of berating myself, I just sat with the discomfort. I didn't run from it. I didn't analyze it. I just allowed it to be there. My chest burned, my hands trembled, but strangely, as I kept breathing into it, something shifted. The feelings lost their power to crush me. I realized they weren't enemies. They were signals, waves passing through me. That was the first time I understood that resilience isn't the absence of emotion. It's the ability to face it without being swallowed. It's strange how we're taught from such a young age to hide what we feel. Don't cry. Be strong. Shake it off. But all those lessons don't actually make us stronger. They just train us to disconnect from ourselves. And when you disconnect, you start living behind that mask. You might appear calm, but inside, you're raging, or terrified, or drowning in loneliness. And the more you deny it, the more fragile you become, because anything could expose the truth you're trying to bury. That's not strength. That's fear disguised as composure. The real strength, I've found, is more subtle. It's this quiet, steady presence that grows when you stop running. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, not because you enjoy the chaos, but because you trust you can endure it. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You just stand, feeling the wind, the rain, the thunder inside you, and you remain. That's what resilience feels like. It's not about pretending the storm isn't there. It's about knowing it can rage, and you'll still be here when it passes. What makes this so hard, though, is that facing yourself means you'll encounter the parts you least want to see. The anger you've suppressed, the shame you carry, the fear of not being enough. These are the shadows we spend our lives avoiding, but avoiding them doesn't make them disappear. It only gives them more control in the dark. I had to admit to myself that so much of my life had been driven by the parts I was unwilling to acknowledge. My perfectionism wasn't strength, it was fear of rejection. My calmness wasn't maturity, it was a mask to hide how fragile I felt. When I finally saw that, it was painful, but it was also the first honest step toward freedom. Because here's the paradox: the moment you stop fighting your inner storms, they lose their power. Emotions don't have to be prisons. They can be teachers, showing you where you're still chained, where you still don't trust yourself, where you're still letting the past dictate the present. And when you look at them with courage, they begin to soften. What once felt unbearable becomes a signal you can read, a wave you can ride. You don't need to eliminate fear or anger or sadness. You just need to stop letting them rule you. I think about it now like this: strength isn't the absence of weakness. It's the ability to carry it with dignity, to hold your trembling self and still walk forward, to know your mind will whisper doubts, your heart will ache, your body will react, but you can remain steady through it. That steadiness doesn't come from pretending you're unbothered. It comes from building a deeper relationship with yourself, one where you no longer run or hide from what's inside. And I'll be honest, it's still a practice. There are days when the mask slips back on, when I find myself defaulting to old habits. But I catch it faster now. I notice the tension, the urge to escape, and instead of condemning myself, I pause. I breathe. I remember that strength isn't about looking perfect. It's about being present, especially when it's messy. And little by little, that practice is changing me. I'm not just pretending to be calm anymore. I'm actually becoming rooted, not because life has gotten easier, but because I've stopped trying to fight myself. So when I say to you, learn to act as if nothing bothers you, I don't mean wear the mask I once wore. I mean cultivate the kind of presence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever arises inside you. It's not about indifference. It's about trust. Trust that you're bigger than your storms. Trust that you don't need to collapse every time life presses on an old wound. Trust that even in the darkest, most chaotic moments, there's a part of you that can remain steady, aware, and free. That's the strength I'm learning to embody. And if I can learn it, I know you can too. There was a moment when I realized I had been living most of my life on autopilot. It's almost embarrassing to admit, but I didn't even notice how rarely I was truly present with myself. Something would happen. Someone cut me off in traffic, a friend forgot to call back, a stranger gave me a strange look, and I'd be swept away instantly like a leaf in the current. I never stopped to ask, why does this affect me so deeply? Why does my body react as if it's under attack? I just let the storm inside dictate my mood, my choices, my words, and afterward, I'd wonder why I felt so drained, why life seemed like a constant struggle against forces I couldn't control. What started to change everything was the practice of watching myself. It sounds simple, almost too simple, just to notice what's happening inside. But when I first tried, it was like shining a light into a dark attic I had avoided for years. I saw the dust, the clutter, the shadows of old fears, and it made me uncomfortable. Yet at the same time, there was a strange relief in finally looking. I realized I had been so identified with every thought, every reaction, that I believed they were me. But when I observed them with a bit of distance, I saw that they weren't me at all. They were habits, echoes of past experiences, voices I had unknowingly adopted. At first, my mind resisted. It wanted to judge everything I noticed. If anger arose, I'd hear the voice, "You shouldn't be angry." If fear came, another voice would sneer, "You're weak." But the practice was to just notice without judgment. To see anger as anger, fear as fear, without labeling them as good or bad. And when I managed that, something subtle shifted. The emotions still came, but they didn't drag me under. It was like watching waves on the shore instead of being tossed in the ocean. The more I practiced, the more I began to see the hidden patterns behind my reactions. A careless comment from someone would ignite not just irritation, but the old wound of feeling invisible. Like when I was a child trying to get attention. A delay or a setback triggered not just frustration, but the deeper fear of not being enough, not being capable. My reactions weren't about the present at all. They were ghosts from the past. And every time I failed to see that, I was letting the past rule me again and again. This was the hardest truth. So much of what I thought was me was actually borrowed. My parents' fears, my culture's demands, my peers' judgments, they had all planted seeds in me that grew into automatic beliefs. Don't be too loud. Don't show weakness. Always succeed. People are watching. And without realizing it, I had let those voices run my life. But when I started observing them, I began to ask, Do I actually believe this? Or have I just been carrying it like an old burden I never chose? The more I questioned, the freer I became. There's a moment when you catch yourself mid-reaction. You feel the surge of anger, the sting of shame. And instead of lashing out or collapsing, you pause. You notice. You breathe. And in that pause, a door opens. You realize you don't have to follow the old script. You don't have to repeat the same patterns. You can choose differently. That realization is small at first, but it grows, and with it grows a kind of quiet power. What struck me most was how observing myself changed not only my emotions, but also my sense of time. Life no longer felt like one relentless rush from one reaction to the next. There was space between stimulus and response, space between thought and action. And in that space, I felt myself again, not the mask, not the borrowed voices, but a deeper, quieter presence. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't euphoric, but it was real, and it was mine. And I'll tell you this, it's not easy. Some days the old patterns are loud, overwhelming, and I slip right back into autopilot. But even then I notice it sooner. And each time I return to awareness, I grow a little stronger, a little freer. The past still lives in me, but it doesn't have to own me anymore. I've started to think of self-observation as the highest form of respect I can give myself. Because when I watch without judgment, I'm saying, you are worth knowing, all of you. Not just the polished parts I want the world to see, but the messy, confused, vulnerable parts too. It's a way of reclaiming my own life from the noise of conditioning. It's how I remind myself that I am not my wounds, not my fears, not even my thoughts. I am the one who sees them, who can choose what to do with them. And the more I live like that, the more I feel a sense of freedom I never had before. Not the freedom of escaping difficulties, but the freedom of meeting them without losing myself. The freedom of saying, yes, this hurts, or yes, I feel afraid, and still being able to choose my next step consciously. That, to me, feels like the beginning of true strength. And it all started with something as simple as watching myself, like a witness, like a friend, patiently, without turning away. I used to think that my ego was who I was, the voice in my head, the constant commentary, the image of myself I tried so hard to protect. When someone challenged me, it wasn't just their words that stung. It felt like an attack on my very existence. A criticism, even a mild one, could leave me spiraling for days, because deep down, my entire sense of worth was tied to this fragile construction of identity I was carrying. And the harder I tried to hold it together, the more brittle it became. It's strange how much energy we spend defending an illusion. I remember moments when I'd enter a room and instantly adjust how I spoke, how I moved, even what I laughed at, just to maintain an image I thought people expected of me. That's the thing about the ego. It convinces you that survival depends on constant vigilance, that if you slip even for a second, you will be exposed, rejected, or humiliated. But what it doesn't tell you is that living this way leaves you perpetually on edge, never truly at peace. When I began to see that the ego was not my true center but a mask I wore, it was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because I didn't know who I was without it. Liberating because maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to keep carrying this heavy armor. I realized that every time I reacted defensively, every time I felt wounded by someone's opinion, it wasn't because of what they actually said. It was because the ego was screaming for its survival. And the truth is, the ego isn't evil. It's not the enemy. It has a purpose. It helps us navigate the world, build a sense of individuality. But when it sits at the center of your being, everything feels personal. Everything feels threatening. That's why life feels like such a battlefield. You're not fighting the world. You're fighting to protect a fragile self-image that was never meant to bear the weight of your entire existence. The shift began when I understood that awareness, not ego, is the true center. There's this space inside that simply watches, the part of me that sees the anger rise, the shame flare, the pride inflate. That part isn't bruised when someone disapproves of me. It doesn't crumble when plans fall apart. It just notices. And when I started to rest more in that place, I found a calmness I had been searching for my whole life. It doesn't mean the ego disappeared. No, it still pipes up all the time, whispering fears, making comparisons, wanting recognition. But now, instead of letting it run the show, I can see it for what it is. A voice, not the whole truth. And with that awareness, I have a choice. I can decide whether to act from ego or from something deeper, something more aligned with who I really am. What surprised me is how relationships began to change. Before, I was hypersensitive to every shift in tone, every unspoken judgment. My self-worth rose and fell depending on how others responded to me. But as I shifted my center from ego to awareness, I didn't feel the same desperation for approval. People could disagree with me, misunderstand me, even reject me. And yes, it still hurt, but it no longer shattered me, because I realized that their reaction wasn't defining who I was. It was simply their perspective. And with that came a strange kind of freedom. I could listen more openly without planning my defense. I could admit when I was wrong without feeling destroyed. I could let go of arguments that weren't worth the energy because I didn't need to win to feel whole. That doesn't mean I became indifferent. It means I became less enslaved. I wish I could tell you that once you recognize the ego for what it is, it just dissolves. But it doesn't. It's still here, still reactive, still loud at times. The difference now is that I don't confuse it with who I truly am. I don't mistake its panic for reality. And that shift alone makes life infinitely lighter. Sometimes I imagine the ego as a frightened child tugging at my sleeve. It wants to be seen, it wants to be safe, it wants reassurance that it matters. And instead of silencing it or letting it take over, I try to acknowledge it gently. I hear you, but I'm not going to let you steer this moment. In that way, the ego becomes less of a tyrant and more of a companion I can guide. This has become one of the most important lessons for me, that peace doesn't come from eliminating the ego, but from putting it in its rightful place. It's like shifting from being trapped inside a storm to watching the storm from a distance. The storm still rages, but you're no longer being tossed around helplessly. You know who you are beyond it, and that awareness makes all the difference. And maybe that's what maturity really is. Not perfection, not total calm, but knowing that you don't have to let the fragile voice of ego dictate your every move. You can choose to act from a deeper, steadier place. And in that choice lies the first real taste of freedom. For most of my life, I treated my emotions like unruly invaders, something to be suppressed, fought, or controlled at all costs. If I felt anger, I'd push it down, ashamed of how raw and explosive it seemed. If fear crept in, I'd cover it with bravado, pretending it wasn't there. Sadness, I'd distract myself, drown it out, make jokes until it disappeared. But of course, it never truly disappeared. It just sank deeper, waiting until the smallest triggers could unleash it all at once. It took me years to realize that emotions aren't enemies, they're messages. Every fear, every pang of jealousy, every wave of sorrow was trying to tell me something about myself, something I hadn't yet faced. But because I didn't want to hear it, I kept silencing the messenger, and the more I silenced them, the louder they became in the dark. I started to notice how often I blamed the world for what I was feeling. If someone criticized me, I'd lash out in defense, convinced it was their fault for hurting me. If I felt jealous, I'd point to the unfairness of life. If I felt rejected, I'd stew in resentment. But what I didn't realize then was that these emotions were pointing inward, not outward. They were mirrors, reflecting parts of me I was too afraid to see. The first time I really sat with anger instead of shoving it away, it was uncomfortable, almost unbearable. My body was tense, my thoughts raced with self-justification, but beneath the heat of the anger, I found something unexpected. Grief. A grief for all the times I felt unseen, dismissed, or powerless. The anger was just the surface, the armor protecting a much older wound. And when I touched that grief, something inside softened. The anger lost its grip because I finally understood its source. It's the same with fear. On the surface, fear tells me I'm in danger. But when I listen more closely, it whispers about vulnerability, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of stepping into the unknown. When I resist it, fear becomes a tyrant, tightening my chest, clouding my thoughts. But when I allow it, when I breathe into it, name it, give it space, it transforms. It stops being an enemy and becomes a guide, showing me where I'm still living small, where I'm still avoiding growth, and sadness too. I used to think sadness was weakness, something to hide. But sadness has a strange kind of honesty to it. It reveals what truly matters to us. You don't grieve for things that don't touch your heart. You don't ache over what you don't love. Sadness is proof of care, of depth, of humanity. When I began to see it that way, I stopped trying to bury it. Instead, I let it flow through me like rain soaking the soil, making space for something new to grow. What I've learned is this: emotions are not masters, but neither are they nuisances. They are signals, messengers carrying truths from the unconscious to the conscious. They don't always speak in polite language. Sometimes they scream. Sometimes they show up as anxiety that grips the body or as irritation at things that shouldn't matter. But if I can pause and listen, if I can ask, what are you really trying to tell me? I always find something deeper than the initial surge. The hardest part is that listening means dropping the habit of blaming others. It means owning that the fire was already inside me before anyone struck a match. Someone's comment may sting, but the reason it stings is because it touches something unresolved in me. That's not their fault. It's my work to do. And while that's a painful responsibility, it's also empowering, because if the root is in me, then so is the power to heal it. I won't pretend this process is neat. It isn't. Some days emotions crash over me and I feel like I've made no progress at all. But even in those moments, I remind myself, the goal isn't to eliminate emotions. It's to stop being ruled by them, to feel fully without being consumed, to learn from them without letting them define me. Now, when anger comes, I listen. When fear rises, I ask what it's protecting. When sadness weighs on me, I honor it instead of running away. And in doing so, I've begun to reclaim a kind of authority over my own inner life. Not the brittle control I once thought was strength, but a steady, compassionate presence that can hold whatever arises. It's a strange irony. The more I allow myself to feel, the less power those feelings have over me. By giving them space, I become freer. And that, I think, is the beginning of real mastery, not a life without storms, but a life where the storms no longer dictate where I go. One of the hardest truths I had to face was how much of my life I had lived in pursuit of approval. It's subtle, almost invisible, the way it creeps in. You make a choice, but in the back of your mind, you're already imagining how it will look to others. You share an opinion, but you weigh it against the risk of being judged. Even the way you laugh, the way you dress, the way you phrase your sentences, it all becomes an audition for acceptance. And the cruel part is, the more you chase approval, the less of yourself you actually live. I remember realizing this during a conversation with someone I admired. I had said something I didn't fully believe, just to sound impressive. And afterward, I felt hollow, almost ashamed. It wasn't that they called me out. They didn't even notice, but I noticed. I could feel the falseness in my own words. and it left a bitter taste. It made me wonder how many times I had betrayed myself in small ways just to earn a smile, a nod, a bit of validation. The truth is, when your worth depends on others, you are never free. Because people are unpredictable. Their moods shift, their opinions change, their attention moves on. If their approval is the foundation of your identity, then you're building your life on sand. One wrong word, one disapproving glance, and the whole thing collapses. That's why I was so reactive, so unstable. I had placed my center of gravity outside myself. It took a long time to understand that real power has nothing to do with control or applause. It has to do with inner steadiness, with being anchored in something that doesn't rise and fall with the tides of public opinion. When you're rooted in that kind of steadiness, you can appreciate approval when it comes, but you don't need it. You can hear criticism without it destroying you. You can stand alone without feeling empty. And here's the paradox. When you stop needing approval, you actually become more authentic, and authenticity has a quiet magnetism. People may not always agree with you, but they'll feel the solidity of your presence. They'll know you're not bending yourself into shapes just to please them. And even if they don't like you, they'll sense the freedom in you, and some part of them will respect it, even envy it. I won't lie, it's uncomfortable at first. The moment you stop chasing approval, you start feeling the withdrawal. You notice how restless you get when someone doesn't respond, how unsettled you feel when your efforts aren't acknowledged. It's like an addiction. You crave the hit of validation, and when it doesn't come, you panic. But if you sit with that discomfort long enough, something shifts. You begin to realize that the craving itself is just another echo of insecurity, and you don't have to obey it. The breakthrough for me was learning to measure my choices by something deeper: clarity of mind, alignment with my values, peace in my own heart. Did my decision bring me closer to who I wanted to be, or did it pull me away? Did it leave me grounded, or did it leave me anxious, desperate for reassurance? When I began using those questions as my compass, I noticed a change. I wasn't tossed around so easily by other people's reactions. I could actually hear their opinions, even their disapproval, without crumbling. And slowly, the highs and lows of validation lost their grip on me. A compliment was nice, but it didn't inflate me. A criticism stung, but it didn't define me. I began to carry a steadier kind of presence, not flashy, not loud, but durable. And that durability gave me something I had been searching for all along, a sense of real freedom. I think about it now this way: life will always offer you mirrors. People will project onto you, praise you, dismiss you, misunderstand you. Some will lift you up, others will tear you down. But none of that can define you unless you hand them the power to do so. The only approval that truly sustains is your own. The approval that comes from living in alignment with yourself, from knowing that even if no one claps, you still walked the path that was true for you. And isn't that the kind of freedom we all want? To stand in ourselves fully, without bending, without begging, without shrinking. It's not arrogance, it's not isolation, it's sovereignty. It's the quiet dignity of belonging first to yourself. And once you've tasted that, even for a moment, you realize no amount of borrowed approval could ever compare. There was a time when I thought the weight I carried was just part of life, absorbing everyone else's moods, their disappointments, their anger. If someone was upset, I felt responsible for fixing it. If someone didn't like me, I turned it into a personal failing. I blurred the line between what was mine and what belonged to others until I couldn't tell the difference. And of course, I told myself this was compassion, that being endlessly available, endlessly accommodating, was proof of love. But in truth, it was self-erasure. I didn't understand then how much of my energy was being drained by carrying things that weren't mine. I'd go home exhausted after conversations where I had given and given, while the other person left lighter. I mistook this depletion for connection. It wasn't connection. It was me abandoning myself in the hope of being needed. And the cruelest part, no amount of self-sacrifice ever truly earned the love I was chasing. It took me years to see that much of this came from projections, mine and others. The anger that someone directed at me often wasn't really about me at all, but about something unresolved within them. And the judgment I cast on others was just as often a reflection of what I couldn't face in myself. We're all mirrors, whether we want to be or not. And until I started owning that, I was caught in endless battles that weren't really mine to fight. Boundaries became a word I resisted for a long time. It felt cold, selfish, unloving. But what I learned is that boundaries are not walls. They are the structure that allows love to exist without destroying us. They're the difference between carrying someone else's pain as if it were my own, and standing beside them with open hands, saying, "I see you, but I won't lose myself to save you." That's not rejection, it's respect, for them and for me. The more I practiced setting boundaries, the more I noticed how much fear it stirred up. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being called selfish. And sometimes those fears were realized. People did leave, people did judge. But I also noticed something else. I didn't collapse. I didn't disappear. In fact, I felt stronger, lighter, and strangely, the relationships that mattered most began to deepen because they were no longer built on my silent resentment or my unspoken exhaustion. They were built on honesty. What really changed everything, though, was beginning to listen to my own inner voice instead of constantly deferring to others. For so long, I believed others knew better, what I should do, how I should act, who I should be. I let the world's expectations drown out the whisper of my own instincts. But that whisper never truly goes away, and when I finally turned toward it, I realized it had been guiding me all along, asking me to trust myself, to live my own truth rather than someone else's script. Self-acceptance became the shield I had been searching for. Not a hard, impenetrable shield, but a soft, steady one. When you accept yourself fully, your flaws, your shadows, your wounds, then no one else's judgment can pierce you in the same way. Their words might sting, yes, but they don't define you anymore, because you've already faced the parts of yourself you once feared. You've already made peace with them. And that peace makes you unshakable in a way approval never could. I won't pretend it's easy. Even now, there are days when I feel the pull to give too much, to bend until I break. But I know the cost of that now. And I know that the truest form of love I can give others starts with the love I refuse to withhold from myself. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're sacred. They protect not only me, but the quality of the love I'm able to share. And maybe that's what freedom really looks like. Not the absence of others' influence, but the ability to remain yourself within it. To walk into the noise of the world with your center intact. To listen with empathy without losing your own voice. To hold space for others without abandoning the space you call home. Yourself. That, I think, is the kind of strength that lasts. There's a quiet moment I remember so vividly. It was late at night, and I was sitting alone in my room, lights off, the hum of the city outside my window. For the first time, I felt an almost unbearable question rising inside me. Whose life am I really living? I had spent years chasing goals, opinions, validations, and identities that weren't fully mine. And in that silence, it struck me that I didn't actually know what it meant to create my own reality. I had been reacting, adjusting, performing, but not truly authoring my existence. It's easy to believe life just happens to us, that we're swept along by circumstance and expectation. But when you stop and look closely, You begin to see how much of your reality is shaped by choices, tiny, often unconscious decisions you make every day. The choice to silence your own needs, the choice to repeat an old story about who you are, the choice to stay in places that shrink you. And as painful as that realization is, it's also the doorway to freedom. If you've been choosing unconsciously, you can begin to choose differently. I started asking myself questions I had long avoided. What do I really value? Not what I was taught to value, not what wins approval, but what stirs something real in me. What kind of life would feel like mine, even if no one else understood it? Those questions weren't easy. They stripped away layers of identity I had built, and for a while I felt naked, unanchored. But beneath the fear was a sense of possibility I hadn't felt since I was a child. The sense that I could shape my life not by following a script, but by writing my own. And here's what I learned. Creating your own reality isn't about grand gestures or radical reinvention. It's about consistency. It's about choosing again and again to act from your inner truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you approval, even when no one is watching. It's about aligning the small daily decisions with the deeper values you've uncovered. And over time, those small choices add up into a life that feels like a reflection of who you really are. What made this process both humbling and beautiful was realizing that it wasn't only about freedom, it was also about responsibility. If I was truly the author of my reality, then I couldn't keep blaming others for where I was. I couldn't hide behind excuses or resentment. Every time I handed my power away, I had to own that it was a choice. And while that truth stung at first, it also gave me strength, because if I was responsible, then I also had the power to change it. It also meant embracing the parts of myself I had long rejected, the shadows, the fears, the doubts, and integrating them instead of running. Because a reality built on denial will always crumble. Only when I accepted the fullness of who I was could I begin to build something real. The darkness in me wasn't something to escape. It was part of the foundation of my strength. Day by day, I practiced embodying this truth, saying no when I meant no, pursuing paths that lit something in me, even if they scared me. Letting go of roles that no longer fit, even when it meant disappointing others. And with each step, I felt a little more at home in my own skin. Not because I had arrived at some perfect state, but because I was finally walking my path with intention instead of stumbling through someone else's. It hasn't been easy. There are still moments when the old voices rise, when I wonder if I'm making a mistake, when the pull of approval tugs at me, when the shadows whisper that I'll never be enough. But now I know those voices don't define me. They're part of the terrain I walk, not the master of my steps. And in choosing, again and again, to live from my own center, I've discovered a sense of liberation that no external validation could ever give me. Maybe that's what it means to be fully alive, not to escape pain, not to achieve constant happiness, but to live as the author of your own story, to create a reality that reflects the wholeness of who you are, light and shadow, fear and courage, doubt and faith, to stand in that creation with patience, with courage, with the quiet dignity of someone who has finally come home to themselves. And I can tell you this, once you taste that kind of freedom, you realize there's no going back. The life shaped by fear, by approval, by unconscious repetition, it no longer fits. You're no longer willing to shrink yourself to belong, because you've found something better, the belonging that comes from being wholly, unapologetically yourself.